Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Chris Gota from the IATA Corporate Comms team. Thank you for dialing into this press briefing with IATA Director General Willie Walsh on the eve of the 42nd ICAO Organisation Assembly, which will set ICAO's priorities and work programme for the next 3 years. I hope everyone online has received the press release that we distributed this morning. It's available on the press room at iata.org if you haven't seen it. The release set out why the Assembly is so important and outlined the key issues that we'll be bringing to the table. For the next hour, Willie will be discussing this in more detail. He's joined in the room by our Senior Vice President for Sustainability and IATA's Chief Economist, Marie Owens Thomsen. And we hope on the line we'll be joined also by our SVP for Operations Safety and Security, Nick Careen. He's in pole position in Montreal, where ICAO has its headquarters. In addition to the press release, we have a page on the IATA website at iata.org/ICAO 2025. And I recommend you check out that because it's got links to blogs where several of our experts have put in more information and going into greater depth.
Okay.
Please note this briefing is entirely on the record, and a recording of the call will be made available later today on the press room. And Willie will give some brief opening comments, then we'll take your questions. To prevent interference on the mics will be muted. So please submit your questions in the chat function on the system, and please state your name and media outlet when posting your questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Willie.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for joining this conference. As Chris said, we're preparing to attend the ICAO Assembly in Montreal, which starts on Tuesday of next week. The Assembly is held formally every 3 years, although this is now the 42nd ICAO Assembly since ICAO came into existence in 1944. There are a number of important issues being discussed at the Assembly. As Chris said, in effect, this maps out the work plan for Assembly for ICAO over the next 3 years. The work that ICAO does is critical to international aviation. Given that we are, as I said, an international body, it's appropriate that we have standards, procedures and practices that cover the global aviation field, and that's the primary purpose of ICAO. There are 19 ICAO annexes. These are all critical documents which cover the ICAO standards and recommended practices that all countries who are party to ICAO should apply. And the Assembly will discuss matters that are relevant to some, if not all, of those annexes. We're particularly keen to update the Assembly in relation to some of the critical issues that IATA have been focused on, including the efforts of the industry to accelerate our work in the area of environmental impact. This is principally through the adoption of CORSIA and the application of CORSIA, which was an international agreement reached through ICAO in 2016. I think a fantastic achievement, but we need to see that agreement turned into practice. We have some concerns that as of today, only one country, Guyana, has made available to the industry what we call CORSIA eligible units. And these are critical to enable the industry to fulfill its obligations under CORSIA. So this will be one of the items that we will be bringing to the attention of the states that are attending. ICAO has 193 states. Many of the papers have been submitted by the ICAO Council, which represents, I think, 35 or 36 of the states in ICAO, and then papers have been submitted by a number of the individual states and by some bodies like IATA. We have official observer status, but that does enable us to submit documents to ICAO for consideration at the Assembly. So a very important meeting. We look forward to a constructive dialogue with member states and with the ICAO Council and Assembly over the coming 2 weeks. We're looking forward to a positive outcome with many of the issues that are relevant to the industry being addressed. being clarified and being adopted for implementation by all of the ICAO member states. So maybe, Chris, on that, I'll pause and hand it over to you for questions.
Thank you, Willie. Yes, so just a reminder, please submit questions in the chat and we will take those in turn. But we're just pending those. So I'll start off with SAF. So you mentioned that SAF is obviously a crucial thing for our net zero ambitions. Would you say the SAF market is functioning adequately at the moment? Have governments helped or hindered the development of the market, and what can they do to help that market function better?
Yeah, SAF is absolutely critical to the industry achieving its net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. And if you look at any of the pathways that have been published, not just by IATA, but by other bodies, SAF will contribute up to 2/3 of the abatement to net zero. We're disappointed at the progress that has been made in relation to the production of SAF. It's not where we need it to be. And we need to see a greater commitment being made by countries that have signed up to the long-term aspirational goal, and more recently to the 2030 aspirational target of 5% of SAF by 2030. At this stage, I don't believe that target can be achieved given where we are in terms of SAF production. So we need to see more focus on incentivizing the production of SAF. The problem as we see it is one of supply and not one of demand. The demand exists, and I think is evidenced by the number of airlines who have entered into agreements for the future purchase of SAF. But we need to see greater production. We're concerned at this stage that we're not making sufficient progress in that area. We're also concerned about the unintended consequences of some of the mandates that have been introduced, particularly under the EU, Refuel EU, and in the UK, where fuel suppliers are mandated to reduce 2% of SAF in the blend of fuel that they're providing to the industry. This has led to a significant increase in fuel costs for airlines operating in the EU and in the UK, but is not translated into a significant increase in the production of SAF. So we're worried that money that could go towards the purchase of SAF is actually being diverted into profits for the fuel supply companies, and that's clearly unacceptable. It's wrong that on a critical issue like this, we have some of the key players seeking to benefit profitably off the requirement for the industry to improve its environmental performance. So we don't believe these mandates have been effective. They're not translating into increased production. We're concerned that the impact, if it's translated into actions by other countries, could lead to significant additional costs, but no value, environmental value to the industry. So, Mari, I don't know if you would like to comment.
Sorry about the technical issues there. Hope you can see us again.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to comment. And I, of course, couldn't agree more with Willie and the fact that this is not a demand. There's no shortfall of demand, but maybe we could also say that there's a shortfall of expected returns in renewable energy. So if you're in the oil companies, you might earn 20% returns. If you're in renewable energy, you might earn 5%. So we operate with a 15 percentage point shortfall of expected returns, which we need the policymakers to help us bridge. And they can do this because under the US Inflation Reduction Act, there were certainly certain SAF projects that earned 20% or even more profit margins in the US. So it's entirely possible. And the support needs to be diverted from the fossil fuel producers towards renewable energy, so we can have more renewable energy for everybody, more low-emitting carbon fuels for everybody, including SAF for air transport.
Thank you, Marie. So we have some questions online. So with regard to the SAF issue, sorry, my questions have disappeared. Yes. So there's been a suggestion that from an aviation environment forum in the UK that SAF production would make the worst use of the waste oil and hydrogen and so on. So do you think aviation SAF should be first in line for feedstocks that are available for SAF?
Yeah, we certainly believe that there's a strong case to be made for aviation to have a fair share of the available feedstocks, principally because the aviation industry, the airline industry is difficult to decarbonize because of the technology that's in operation today and the likely dependence on a liquid fuel source for some considerable time to come. So it's important to remember that even the most modern aircraft that are being produced today, which are significantly more efficient than the aircraft that they will replace, will require a liquid fuel source for some time to come. And these aircraft, which are very expensive, are likely to be in operation for 20 to 25 years. And there's no new aircraft design on the table at the moment, certainly none that would enable long-haul travel to operate in a different way. So when you look at CO2 from international aviation, it's important to remember that the most significant contribution is from flights of greater than 1,500 kilometers. About 80% of the CO2 that's produced comes from flights of greater than 1,500 kilometers. So while we've seen some advances in electric and maybe hybrid electric, they're likely to only play an impact on the very short to potentially short to medium haul in the time frame that we're talking about. So there isn't really an alternative for aviation at this stage. And I think when we talk about the available feedstocks, there are multiple feedstocks available. And certainly in the short to medium term, there's plenty of feedstock available to fulfill the requirements for the airline industry. We are somewhat concerned about the focus that Europe in particular has on eSAF, because this clearly requires green hydrogen to enable us to produce a fuel that is truly sustainable. Supply of green hydrogen is very limited at the moment. It's also extremely expensive, and we think there's plenty of feedstock available for the industry to operate without dependence on e-fuels, certainly in the short to medium term. I think in the longer term, e-fuel is going to be a critical component. But maybe, Murray, you'd like to add to that?
Yes. It so happens that we have a report in the oven for everybody to come out any day now, where we have assessed feedstock capabilities and capacities across the globe, specified them per region, and indeed come to the conclusion that Willie just highlighted, that feedstock is not the hindrance here for us reaching the 500 million tons of SAF that we need in 2050. The main bottleneck is actually how quickly we can mature and bring the technologies to commercial viability. So the bottlenecks are really on the technological side. They need a lot of support and incentives to be able to mature quickly. If we can't do that, then there's not going to be any production capacity out there to take advantage of the available feedstock.
Thank you. Just staying with environment for a little bit longer, we've got a question from the FT, and they're asking, with increasingly, say, right-wing, if I can say it that way, governments in ascendancy, many of which do not believe in climate change, do you envisage any scenario where the industry changes its net zero targets or the glide path towards net zero?
Well, I think it is important to remember that getting agreement at an industry level for net zero in 2050 was very, very difficult. It's clear that there are some airlines who struggle to see how we can afford the transition to net zero. There are others who believe that the technology will not be sufficient to enable us to get to net zero in 2050, even if the money was available. So, we've always made clear that this is going to be extremely challenging and expensive, whichever way you look at it. So the transition to net zero is not going to be easy. I think the changing geopolitical environment may have some short-term impact on how people view these issues. But the feedback we get consistently from the vast majority of players in the industry is that they recognize that our industry must play its part in addressing the environmental impact that we have. And it's important to point out this is not new. Our commitment to environmental issues goes back many, many years. In fact, I think it was in maybe 2009 that the industry agreed to a 50% reduction in net emissions by 2050. So we've been looking at our the impact that we have on the environment and the actions that we need to take for many, many years. So it's not a new issue. It's still very much an issue on the agenda for all airlines. And while the emphasis may change over time, I think the long-term direction of travel is still very much aligned with doing whatever we can to ensure that the industry has a viable, profitable future, a viable financial future, and a viable environmental future. So, we will continue to focus on these issues going forward, exactly as we have for many, many years in the past. I think the difference now is that we're now seeing SAF being produced. I think the questions that people had 10, 15 years ago as to whether sustainable fuel was technically possible have been addressed. We now need to turn what we know is technically possible into something that's commercially possible and commercially viable for the industry.
Thanks, Willie. On CORSIA, that's another of our papers that we're submitting to the Assembly. We have a question from Karen Walker who's asking, why has the adoption of CORSIA taken so long? And connected with that, we have a question on the EEUs, the emissions units, and perhaps, Marie, you could explain a bit what those are and what our issues is with those.
Right. So offsets are a key lever in our roadmap for how we can get to net zero. There will be residual emissions in 2050, and they need to be offset. We have this offsetting program thanks to ICAO. It was adopted as early as in 2016, and the countries under ICAO decided to put this obligation on airlines to pay for these offsets. The offsets are related to certified projects in the developing countries mostly, and airlines then directly help finance those projects, which deliver certifiable CO2 emissions reductions and also deliver socioeconomic benefits and jobs and so on. So it's a really beneficial program for everybody involved, and connects obviously with a global carbon market. Yeah, so it's not only airlines who want to buy these CORSIA eligible emissions units. Anybody involved in the carbon market want to buy them because they are considered the gold standard for such financial instruments. So we're together building the global climate finance infrastructure by promoting this and engaging in this program. So the problem is that there are administrative requirements under the Paris Agreement that countries are obliged to do. They need to take these credits off the Paris Agreement's register and make them available for airlines under ICAO's CORSIA. And that is, of course, a bit of a heavy administrative routine, plus the fact that the states actually have optionality. Yeah, they can choose to sell these credits to airlines or to other countries or keep them for themselves. So they have optionality, but airlines have an obligation to buy them. So this is all very problematic. And we're trying to make it easier for the states to release these credits in our favor. by hook and by crook, and maybe by sending people out into the offices and help facilitate this process.
Thank you, Marie. Okay, let's park environment for a bit, and we'll move to some of the other issues that we're dealing with at the Assembly, and principally across that is of course safety issues. So we have a question from Oman. The last 10 months saw fatal accidents across continents and reports related to emergency landings. We never get access to the full accident reports. So obviously one of our papers is indeed on accident reporting, Willie. Perhaps you could brief the team on that.
Yeah, under ICAO Annex 13, which establishes the obligations of states to investigate serious incidents and accidents, it's very important that the states fulfill those obligations and produce a preliminary report within 1 month of the accident or serious incident, and then ideally to have the final full report within 1 year. Now, it's not always possible to do it within 1 year, but unfortunately what we're seeing is a very high number. We estimate about 43% of the accidents and incidents that have taken place between 2018 and 2023 have not yet published a final report. Now, these reports are really critical to ensuring the future safety of the industry, because we spend a lot of time as an industry evaluating what happened to make sure that we can share knowledge across the industry to ensure that these incidents and accidents aren't repeated. And these reports, therefore, are critical input into the assessment and knowledge sharing that the industry undertakes. So it's very important for us from a safety point of view that states fulfill their obligations under ICAO Annex 13. As I said, it can be difficult to complete full investigations within the time frame. We also acknowledge that there are some countries that may not have all of the resources that they need. So we want to see greater sharing of resources and assistance where resources aren't available. So I think there's a lot that states can do working together to ensure that this critical input into the future safety of the industry and a critical obligation that states have is fulfilled.
Thank you, Willie. I'm going to try and see if I can bring Nick Careen on this. I don't know if Nick, if you can hear us and if you're able to join the call. But if you have anything you'd like to add on that.
No, Willie covered it all.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. So I'm going to go back to the questions. There was actually a question for Nick here, which I'm gonna find. But while I find that, there is a question here concerning the potential for Russia to join the ICAO General Assembly. Do you think Moscow will rejoin the Council? Do we have a view on that?
So obviously, safety transcends any political issue. It's critical for us that we operate in a global industry and that everybody who participates in that contributes to the safe, efficient, secure operation of the global commercial industry. We're not a party to decisions as to who gets elected to the council, so we leave that to the states who, obviously the member states who will participate in the election to finalize the 35 members of the ICAO Council, which is an important body because it sort of, if you like, oversees the activities of ICAO between assemblies and will continue to ensure that the focus is on the right issue for the coming 3 years. But the election of council members is for the member states, and so we don't have any input into that.
Thank you, Willie. Nick, we have a question for you from Africa regarding African safety. And other than the IOSA program and ICAO membership and so on, what other things could be done to help improve aviation safety in Africa? Thanks.
Well, I think some of the things that Willie had already touched on, the one we just spoke about, accident investigations, there is a regional discrepancy between the amount of accidents that we sustain in the industry, and Africa happens to be a continent that does have some challenges in that area. We could, the capacity building and efforts of learning from these accidents could certainly play a part and improve the safety in the region. We're also running a program called CASIP, which is directly focused on African safety, which talks about capacity building, as well as further audit programs, information sharing and data sharing and the like, working with local carriers, working with AFRA and others to make sure that we have relevant efforts that are specific to the region. So I think those are the first things that immediately come to mind. We do work with the African carriers. We do work with the African nations. There's a lot of opportunity for sure. When you just look at some of the very basic things like facilities that are being operated in and out of could be improved, that would have an immediate impact on safety within the region. So it is an area of focus and an area of great interest from a safety standpoint.
Thank you, Nick. Staying with safety, another of our papers to the ICAO Assembly concerns GNSS interference. And we have a question from Tom Ballantyne, or in Aviation, asking on this issue, IATA wants better coordination. Do we really expect we can get some of the countries of the world to cooperate more on this issue? Willie?
Yeah, I think we can. And it's not just IATA calling for this. Indeed, many of the individual member states have also raised this issue. Because the frequency of GNSS radio frequency interference has significantly increased in recent times. This is one of the areas that we in IATA very much focused on. And it's through the data collection that we have at IATA that we've been able to identify the frequency of interference and also the areas where we've witnessed interference. So this clearly is something that does have an impact. It's not to say that it makes aviation unsafe, because obviously we have a fallback to ground-based navigation equipment, but it does create interference, and it does create inefficiency and could have a safety impact. We've not seen any safety impact to date, but obviously we want to see this issue stamped out. There are measures that the states can take to support this initiative, and we expect this to be one of the areas where there will be widespread agreement at the ICAO Assembly to ensure that we can eliminate, obviously, significantly reduce would be a positive first step, but really we want to see the elimination of the interference in relation to GNSS. So I'm optimistic that we will see progress in this area at the Assembly over the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, Willie. Nick, staying with this one, Chris Jasper in the Telegraph's asking, has the jamming situation in Eastern Europe and Middle East eased at all? And would you describe it as an inconvenience or a genuine safety risk?
Well, we treat everything as a genuine safety risk. So we don't consider anything safety related as an inconvenience, first and foremost. And no, it has not subsided in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. In fact, it's probably increased slightly, depending on certain times and certain activity, which we've seen particularly in the Middle East. And so, no, we continue to place focus on this. We have seen, to Willie's point, an interest. We were the first ones raising the flag on this a couple of years ago, and it's now become something that countries and states are willing to address or take seriously. And I mean, if we do a little pun, but if we have more politicians on flights that experience spoofing and jamming, maybe we'll get this thing rectified sooner rather than later. However, having said that, the only other thing I would add to Willie's comments is that we also have to start investing in new technology. Advancements in our avionics, which can further mitigate the risks associated with this, which we are not seeing the level of innovation in that area, which is something that we're also pursuing.
Thanks. Another operational issue concerns pilot age, which is a paper we've submitted. Willie, what's really behind this call from us on this issue?
Well, I think this issue really highlights the importance of data when making important decisions. And we believe that there is no evidence to support the current restriction. And in fact, a lot of evidence to suggest that moving from 65 to 67 can be done without any impact on safety because of the other measures that are put in place around this. So while some people have said this is a response to a pilot shortage in some areas, it's not really. It's because indeed this should apply to all regions, not just in areas where they're currently experiencing a short-term shortage of pilots. But again, it's evidence-based, it's data-based decision-making, and we believe that that's where our industry excels. You know, we don't make decisions based on politics when it comes to safety. We make decisions based on data and proper risk assessment, and the data and the risk assessment shows that an increase in the retirement age from 65 to 67, maintaining the other measures, represents a safe option for the industry. And therefore, we've proposed that this is one of the areas that ICAO looks at. And it's important to remember, we moved from a forced retirement age of 60 to 65. So it's not so long ago. In fact, when I joined the industry, 55 was seen as the normal retirement age. So that was 45 years ago. So a lot of progress has been made. And I think we have a lot of evidence now available to the industry to enable us to proceed with measures like this on a safety risk assessment basis.
Why 67, not say 70?
Well, to be honest, this is again based on data, based on the risk assessment, and this is something that requires continuous assessment. So I think this is a safe step. Based on all of the data that's available to us. And that's not to say that that should be the end of it. I think this is an issue that should be continued to be reviewed over time. You don't have age restrictions on many critical jobs around the world. The difference with our industry, and particularly when it comes to pilots, is that pilots licensing requires continuous assessment, not just in terms of skills, but also continuous medical assessment. So, that's what enables us to use data to make a risk assessment that gives us confidence that we can move from 65 to 67 and do so in a safe manner.
Thank you. Nick, could you just summarize for us briefly what some of those safeguards are that we're insisting on should remain, just in case anyone is concerned about this change?
No, I think to Willie's point, that 67 is almost a number in some ways. It's just to make a palatable change, but this change needs to be, or this discussion needs to continue to carry forward, which is part of the request in our papers as well. And Willie mentions continuous medical reviews in terms of pilots, so that increases with age, which also mitigates the risk. And on top of that, carriers that are countries that are doing this, by the way, that do not have any age restriction at all, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Japan, and some others with a little lesser, but only allowed to operate domestically, have procedures in place which prevents pilots at a certain age from flying with pilots at the same age, or something similar to that to mitigate the risk as well. We've seen no increase in safety incidents in any of these locations associated with age. It's, with the last time we changed this, as Willie mentioned, from 60 to 65 was 2006. It's time for us to take a look at this in a more, granular fashion in terms of using data and understanding this better, as opposed to just the way we've been doing it today, which is an incremental review every 20 years.
Thank you. Let's turn to consumer protection. We have a paper on that. This year is 10 years since IATA set out its core guidance on consumer protection. What are we asking states at ICAO to do with this?
Yeah, so it was in 2015 that ICAO updated its documentation in relation to this. We recognize that consumer protection has a role to play. I think, again, it's important that we focus on the data to identify what is the problem, exactly what is the problem, and to put consumer protection in place that addresses the problem rather than just build on decisions that were taken in one area, such as the EU back in 2004 with the introduction of EU 261, and then make additional measures to enhance regulation based on that. These measures aren't always in the interest of the consumer. In fact, again, I think it's always important to look at what are the unintended consequences of the introduction of new regulations. But if you look at what the EU was trying to address in 2004, and the problem that existed then, that problem is not the same today. And in fact, in many cases, the problems that the industry had encountered and that consumers were experiencing have been eliminated. What's also important to recognize is that the consumer regulations that have been put in place mean that airlines bear responsibility for compensating the consumer, despite the fact that in many events, many occasions, the fault is not with the airline, and we've seen plenty of evidence of that in recent years. We highlighted just recently the closure of Heathrow Airport as a result of Heathrow's inability to operate after they lost some electrical power to the airport, caused total chaos, the cancellation of hundreds, thousands of flights, inconveniencing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers. The airlines had no responsibility in relation to that, and yet the cost of compensation had to be borne by the airline without the ability to recover that compensation from the people who caused the problem. So I think regulation, well-intended regulation that was introduced has been amended, reinterpreted by courts over the years. And what we're saying is there should be a focus on what issues are we trying to address? Where is the industry failing to deliver? And where should the industry be accountable for failing to deliver to its customers and address that rather than just layer additional regulation on top of regulation where in many cases problems do not exist.
Thanks. So connected with that, Brent from CNC3 TV says there's been some reporting that the Trump administration may roll back some proposed Biden-era protection rules. What do we think about that? And in more generally, how can the industry make the flying experience easier for travelers when things go wrong, while not taking on more brunt of responsibility?
Well, again, I think there is strong justification for the Trump administration rowing back on this, because they can take that decision based on data. The US Department for Transportation has data on things like denied boarding, involuntary denied boarding. So there is actual data that can be used to justify decisions. When we look at other jurisdictions, the data does not exist. And in fact, some figures are being quoted that are based on surveys, in some cases taken by claims management companies to support decisions rather than being based on hard data. So I think when you look at the scale of the problem in the US, it is minuscule. And the burden of the regulation and the cost of the regulation, because it's not just, people don't just need to look at what's the cost to the airline of paying the compensation. It's the cost of putting these schemes in place, monitoring them, dealing with them, in many cases having to deal with customers who believe they're entitled to compensation when in fact under the regulations they're not. This entails a significant cost burden on the industry, which ultimately gets paid for by consumers because we are an industry that generates wafer-thin margins. So the idea that this compensation comes without impact is a nonsense. Ultimately, any compensation that airlines will pay will be reflected in ticket prices. And that's the reality of the situation. So I think when you look at the evidence, look at the data, you can quite justifiably stand back and say we don't need to introduce this regulation because the problem that people believe exists does not exist on a scale that warrants regulation. So I think the industry works well, principally because we're a brutally competitive industry. So if you as a consumer encounter poor service, you invariably have the option to take your business somewhere else and fly with another airline. And that's the incentive that any commercial entity has to ensure that they provide good service to their customers, not just good service on a daily basis, but in particular to deal with their customers when things go wrong, because we know that that's when customers are most likely to be loud in their criticism when things go wrong, and where customers have experienced things going wrong and they're handled well by suppliers, then we find that can be a very positive environment for the provider of the services. So, as I say, the data does not support the introduction of regulation as we've seen. And I think the US Trump administration is quite right in challenging whether the measures that the Biden administration considered introducing or wanted to introduce are relevant.
Staying with US policy, we have a question from Mexico. What is our view of the recent decision by the Department of Transportation to terminate the alliance between Aeromexico and Delta, particularly on the grounds of violating a bilateral agreement by reducing slots?
Well, I think this is a geopolitical issue. The industry was disappointed, indeed, you could say angry with the measures that were taken by the Mexican government in relation to the forced transfer of flights in Mexico. And it doesn't surprise me that the Trump administration would take these measures to try and encourage or force the Mexican government to reevaluate the decisions that they had taken. As I said, there was very little welcoming of the decision when it was taken by the Mexican government to reallocate activity between airports. So I think this is just a natural progression of geopolitical issues, and I've no doubt, will be addressed. The one thing I would say about these joint ventures, they have proven to be positive for consumers. And I know it's something that gets debated a lot, but it is important to remember that any of these joint ventures have had to go through a rigorous assessment process by competition authorities to ensure that consumers aren't harmed by their introduction. And I think there's plenty of evidence to show where these joint ventures have actually led to a significant increase in services, an increase in competition overall, an improvement in services, better options and better pricing for consumers. So I think we've got to separate out the consumer impact of these joint ventures from the political impact of some of the decisions that led to the decision that has been taken by the US in relation to the Aeromexico Delta joint venture.
Thank you. Marie, I'll come to you on that in just a second. But Nick, you have something on the Mexico decision on slots, I believe.
Yeah, they had recently made an announcement to go back to the 80-20 rule in terms of slots, which is in line with the World Slots Guidelines. That was within the last couple of weeks. Perhaps that could be construed or viewed as an attempt to appease prior to the decision being made. But regardless, they have adopted that, and the DOT did leave the window open, which they don't often do, to review this in the future in terms of providing for a level playing field between those markets which were being served by both airlines. So I think Willie said it correctly. It's just there's a couple of additional points that we'll see how this evolves with time.
Thank you, Marie. On the joint ventures and so on, anything you'd like to add on the economic benefits of those?
Well, I mean, I think my mind goes to taxes and those things when you phrase the question like that, and the importance that we, that have a strong governance of international aviation, and that everybody collaborates so that we don't cause fragmentation. Yeah, so that's maybe another aspect of the Trump government, that has clearly caused a lot of fragmentation, certainly in the trade space. And we would not want to see the governance of our industry to go in the same direction.
Thank you. That's a great segue when you mentioned tax, because that is a key issue for us at this assembly. We've submitted a paper on Article 8, and also we're supporting a US paper referring to the solidarity tax. Willie, what's your view on the Article 8, and what do you think we're going to be able to get out of that?
Yeah, I think, again, you have to wonder what was the problem. Nobody actually was looking for this issue to be addressed, and one body of the UN took it upon themselves to evaluate the aviation industry. And let's be clear, they didn't include ICAO in that evaluation. So I think it points to a dysfunctional UN, to be honest with you, because the tax arrangements are clearly covered under the ICAO regulations and contained in most of the bilateral agreements that exist that regulate global aviation, international aviation today. And we don't see a problem with the situation that exists today. The problem in changing it is, however, of great concern, because it would involve a massive increase in administrative requirements by airlines. And quite honestly, I think in many cases, if this were to be introduced, so moving away from the taxation based on the residence or the tax residence of the airline to where the revenues are generated, it could lead to some airlines deciding not to serve certain markets because the cost of administering the change in taxation regulation would probably outweigh the profitability that they're making there. So I think states that believe that this may be of benefit to them, quite honestly, need to be very careful when they're looking at the implications of this. It could lead to a very significant reevaluation of network planning by airlines if they were forced to undertake tax assessments based on everywhere they fly rather than on their country of residence. So again, be wary of unintended consequences, but I think this is one that could have very significant unintended consequences. And therefore, we would urge member states to stick with what they have and what nearly all, if not all of them, embed in their bilateral agreements between states, which has functioned perfectly well without any demand from any states that I'm aware of to see a change in relation to how the taxation is calculated.
Thank you, Willie. And very on the solidarity tax and the issues we got with that, perhaps you'd like to sort of brief the journalists on our issues there.
Yeah, so this is also more of the, in a sense, more signs that the UN system certainly doesn't communicate well within its own parts, right? So we have the COP people and the Paris Agreement that have said that we need to raise more money for developing countries and help them address their climate issues, which of course we totally agree with. Now, the problem is that they, instead of sort of designing a proper funding strategy to make this happen and arguably tap in on the fossil fuel industry that we're trying to shrink. That's the global commitment under the Paris Agreement. Instead of doing that sort of more holistically and see how we can actually raise this money, the best proposal, sort of the first proposal that these people have come up with, is that we should put a ticket tax on premium class travel. So the mind boggles a bit. Yeah, we already have an international system that addresses airlines' CO2 emissions, that airlines actually pay for, and that in the form of CORSIA, and that generates all these massive international access to an international market. And we're instead of sort of making that a reality, we're now going to tax a tax base that is inherently from the beginning thin in developing countries, and have their consumers pay for that, and think that that will in any way, shape, or form raise the kind of funds that we are all committed to raise for the developing countries. So it's a very, again, short-sighted, piecemeal proposal without taking any unintended consequences into consideration, or even sort of bothering with understanding the broader landscape of the solutions that are available and how global aviation works.
And with zero environmental benefit. I think the thing people need to remember is that this industry has become much more efficient in the use of the energy, the fuel that we're using. All you have to do is look at average seat factors. So we're estimating this year that the average seat factor for the industry will be 84% across the full year for the industry. Now, when I started in this industry, the average seat factors were in the low 60s. And what taxes will do, as we've seen before, and as was the reality 40 years ago with this industry, is it's not going to stop the flights operating. All it's going to do is it'll prevent some people from sitting on those flights that will operate. And instead of having average seat factors of 84%, we'll drift back towards, average seat factors in the high 70s. So the flights will still operate. The fuel will still be burnt. The CO2 will still be produced. It just makes it a less efficient industry. And it just means that a lot of people who have had the benefit of flying, and a lot of countries who've had the economic benefit of connectivity through flying, will lose out. Again, it's very important when we're considering these measures to understand what are we trying to do, what are we trying to address, and challenge ourselves. Will this proposal, which isn't backed universally, I have to say, it is only at the moment backed by a small number of countries, will it have the consequences that are intended? And quite honestly, with this one, I don't believe it will. And therefore, we need to be very careful that the countries that believe they might benefit are likely to be the ones that will actually suffer the most if some of these measures are introduced.
Indeed. Thank you. In terms of other environmental measures, what about airspace redesign, making airspace more efficient? Where would you say that would sit in our priorities?
Well, it's a critical issue. We highlight the importance of efficient airspace design in Europe because it's been an area of debate for many, many years. And we know that European airspace is very inefficient today and could be significantly more efficient, which would have economic and environmental benefits, huge environmental benefits. The estimated CO2 reduction with the single European sky is anywhere between 10 and 12%. These are massive figures and could be achieved without any additional investment. So this really is low-hanging fruit. And the same applies in other parts of the world. We don't have an efficient ATC environment, largely because much of the airspace we operate today is still designed around airspace that was introduced in the 40s. Technology has moved on significantly since then. So if we're to achieve our net zero in 2050 ambition, it's important that we look at anything that can be done to reduce gross emissions. And, airspace redesign, more efficient use of the airspace would have a significant impact on gross emissions, which clearly is something that every regulator, every politician, every environmentalist should be interested in. So this will continue to be an area of focus for the industry, for IATA in particular, for the coming years.
Thank you. Nick, anything you would like to add on airspace issues in particular?
Oh, I think Willie said it best, but I mean, it is a high priority for us because of some obvious opportunities that will improve schedule efficiency for the airlines, but also has an extrapolated benefit on the environmental side as well. And whether that is better trajectory, better flight forecasting itself, technology, better use of technology. A lot of the airspace, to Willie's point, is restricted for military use. There is time for a redesign. We are now investing in an ATM, or air traffic management tool, which will allow us to be able to have a better idea of how we're flying as an industry, what we could improve, what we planned versus what we operated. So we'll be able to actually use some data to be able to illustrate what the true benefits are to be more efficient, and not just using an extrapolated 20% or 30%, actually use data to say this is how better we could be if we did it differently. And we should be able to start using some of those tools at the beginning or towards the middle of next year.
That's fantastic. While I've got you there, Nick, we've got a question from Financial Africa on turbulence. What initiatives are IATA taking to reduce turbulence-related incidents?
Well, I'd love to say that a trade association can reduce turbulence, but that's simply not the case. I think what we're doing, specifically within IATA itself, is we've introduced a tool which is becoming widely used amongst the industry called Turbulence Aware, which will give cockpits around the world more data to be able to make decisions in flight, to be able to address the potential for turbulence. Clear air turbulence is something that can't be forecasted, but communication amongst airlines to be able to be prepared for it when if someone gets impacted by it. Turbulence Aware is a tool which can provide that type of data, which is, in the old days was, done in the form of pilot reps that weren't necessarily readily available. This gives the data right into the pilot's hands to be able to make decisions. There also been discussions around procedures around when to put the seatbelt on, and reminding consumers and customers that when the seatbelt is on, you should remain seated and you should have it on. And also, when you're seating in your seat, you should have your seatbelt on. There's no harm in that. You can loosely put it around your waist, which most airlines are advising customers to do that, which reduces the risk as well. So those are a few areas we continue to monitor. We look at turbulence on a regular basis. It's sensationalized in a way because it does hit the news when it does happen. But we are seeing an increase, but I think we're also seeing an increase in reporting, which also needs to be taken into consideration when we talk specifically about turbulence.
Thank you. We're almost out of time. I know there's a lot of questions in the queue. Thank you for those. We will get back to you on those. I've kind of left a lot of the individual country-based ones because today we were trying to look at these global issues that will be handled at ICAO, but we will get back to you as best as we can to respond to your questions. So thank you for your patience on that. I'm going to ask one last question to Willie, which would be, there's obviously a lot of issues that we're asking ICAO to look at. We're probably not going to get them all addressed. What would be the most important thing that you think ICAO needs to deal with at this assembly?
I think, given the importance of environmental concerns and the immediate impact, we want to see the issue of CORSIA addressed, because that's an agreement that is in place. We're in now the first stage, 2024 to 2026, and we need CORSIA eligible units to be available to the industry. So that's something that I think is important to be addressed. We obviously want to see states, governments do more to incentivize the production of sustainable aviation fuel and to understand the unintended consequences of the mandates that they have introduced. And I think there will obviously have to be a continued focus on issues that we talked about, like the GNSS interference, and anything that can be done by ICAO to remind, but more importantly, to demand that states fulfill their obligations under ICAO Annex 13 when it comes to accident and serious incident reports. But quite honestly, all of the issues that we've talked about are important. But top of my list, I think, given that CORSIA has now been in place since 2016, was a fantastic achievement by ICAO to get countries around the world to agree to a global mechanism, reinforcing CORSIA as the global market-based measure to be used for the industry to push back against the introduction of individual taxation by countries and to genuinely address the environmental impact. I think that is going to be important, and I expect that to be one of the outcomes that we'll see from this ICAO assembly.
Thank you, Willie. And thank you, Marie, and to Nick for your time as well. A reminder, more information is available at iata.org/ICAO 2025. Recording and transcript of this last hour will be on there. Keep an eye out for more blog posts from our experts and alerts on social media. And please do come to Corp Comms if you have any further questions, and we'll try and get back to you on the ones you've done. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you.